What is going on, all you titans of tabletop out there?
Ooh, good one.
And welcome to Split Screen D&D. My name's Tom Quinn, resident dungeon master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth.
And I think we've got a.
I think this is gonna be a banger one.
Why don't you bring us in on this one? Because I think it was your baby.
It was. So my idea for our conversation this week was, hey, how do you go from just burying your nose and reading from your character sheet and just focus purely on yourself to being completely immersed in the table where you're having an organic experience and organic conversations? Kind of I feel what has become almost the new goal of a lot of D&D tables. And how do you pull that off to be completely immersed in the game?
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I think, and I completely agree. I do think that immersion really has become a target that a lot of tables now are to a different level. It's just a different animal, I think, than in tabletops of yore. And I don't know how much that should be credited to the actual plays that are out there. Obviously the giants like Critical Role and Dimension 20.
One of these days we're going to get one episode done without mentioning those people. One day.
It doesn't blow my mind that, like,
it's like, how do you talk about, basketball?
Yeah, I mean, there's virtually any topic we talk about, those who are at the pinnacle of that space would. Yeah. But I do think I think immersion is something that a lot of people are striving for, like greater and greater levels of immersion. Yep. And I would second the notion. I think it's something you should be striving for. I mean, again, everyone runs their own game. Everyone
right.
But I don't see there being a really solid argument for less immersion.
Well, yeah. What's the negative for more immersion?
Yeah,
I
think that probably there's some argument for, like, to what extents are you willing to go to?
Yeah,
to the same, we don't cosplay at our table or anything like that. There's absolutely an argument that increases immersion. And as much as I'm repping that argument, there's virtually no world in which I'm gonna show up dressed at the table.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess never say never, but
yeah, I've thought about it once or twice, but then am I being self-conscious then when I'm at the table, and is that going to pull me out of this experience? But yeah, we don't have to dwell on the cosplay, but as far as and I think a great place to start with immersion is you've got to have a really fine-tuned game in order to get immersed. Everything's got to be on all gears and all cylinders. So I think a great place to start is pacing.
Okay. Can I tweak that just slightly?
Absolutely.
Because I think pacing is a manifestation of just having a really solid, and I think you've said this maybe just in different words, a really solid foundation. So that's DMs out there, have a solid foundation for your rules if you're adjudicating. Yeah. Players out there, have a solid foundation for your character sheets, your abilities, You don't
have to have I feel like I'm pretty up to date on my stuff. I don't have everything memorized. I still have to reference it, but I have a good idea.
Well, I think it's much for the characters. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, the characters have a smaller portfolio that they're keeping track of.
Oh yeah, bless DM's hearts. Yes.
But just in the sense that that's not to say it's an insubstantial amount to manage, but it's also a deal where there's so much of what the dungeon master is keeping track of that in many cases the other players also know. I mean, they know what a status effect does.
Yes.
Depending on the status effect, they already know what that means.
Right.
So the dungeon master, that's off his plate all of a sudden. Like, you understand what it means to be unconscious.
Right.
What it means to be grappled. What it means to be restrained. What have you. And on the player side, I think certainly it's not a bad idea for dungeon masters to also be up on the player sheet, but they've got plenty already going on. So I would just say showing up to the table with that foundation.
That might be a good way to approach this. Or do you want to try go like a pyramid?
Yeah, I think we can scaffold that out. I mean, I think that's a great place to start. This should be couched in the notion that if you're a new player, a new DM, it's going to take time to get to this place. We're kind of talking about now running a game, and I would say immersion is a a next tier. Just running the game is a huge accomplishment
Right.
for a new DM. Just playing in the game is an awesome accomplishment for a new player.
Yes.
But we're talking about basically once you've gotten to that place where you're now going, what can I do to take this to the next level?
Advanced tips here at Split Screen TNT. And we're all about those, just the tips.
Just the advanced tips.
Just the advanced tips.
So yeah, I think showing up, having a solid foundation will begin to pay dividends into pacing. And I think we can begin scaffolding pacing kind of directly onto that foundation. Because I think even very, let's say new games, so new DMs, new players start reaping the benefits of showing up well-versed and well-prepared at the table.
Yes.
In their games running more smoothly, the pacing feeling more akin to what should be transpiring for the characters, not for the players. That's not checking the rule book a dozen times over the course of a single session.
Yeah.
One note on with regard to pacing and rules, I would also throw out there that from an immersion standpoint, and use your judgment. There are times where you're in a battle and maybe it's very important that you get this rule right.
Okay.
There are other times where maybe what's transpiring in front of you is awesome and the pacing feels great. You can tell everyone's super engaged. Part of your job as a DM is deciding when not to pull the rule book out. There might be times where you are on the fence about how to adjudicate something. And I would say if it's at the expense of a fully engaged table,
Right.
it might just be better to go with your gut, to just go with what makes sense. Obviously,
Well, yeah,
this
common
isn't
sense. Yeah.
and so, I think pacing is the reward granted to the entire table when every member shows up having done their due diligence, having prepared to be sitting at the table.
So yeah, from the DM side, I know you have so much to prepare for a session. I'm just trying to think for the player side, you do want to have, like, mechanically, you want to know what your character can do. You want to know their powers and their abilities. That's a given. But also, I feel like, because a lot of the game, especially if you want to get into the immersion side is the social side of things. And when you get into that layer, knowing your character's motivations, why are they doing what they're doing, and also motivations, but also things that hold them back, fears, weaknesses, and that you're ready to act on those. Because I think we a lot of times shy away from those aspects, like showing that your character's afraid, when actually that's the most engaging thing you can do sometimes, and a lot of times.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the prep extends well beyond understanding your character sheet. And in some regards, from an immersion standpoint, much in the same way that I just advocated, sometimes it's better to not pull out the rule book. I would say there are a lot of bonuses to the immersion that a player can get out of the game space by kind of forgetting about their. I know this sounds contradictory.
I don't like this at all.
No, but just in the sense that a good example of being too in tune with the fact that you have a character sheet in front of you is skewing a social situation towards a role that will benefit you versus allowing the situation you are immersed in to dictate how your character would act. Maybe your character is not intimidating, but you are pissed as hell.
Right.
And this gets into this. Here's a really good example of the way those two dissolving of the mechanical or that scaffolding hold hands well. Is, let's say, for instance, your character does not do intimidation well. You go, but you're in the moment, you're pissed as hell, and you just go for it.
Right.
And it's like a gut shot. Like you nail that. That might be a space where I go, I know from an adjudication standpoint, I should have him roll. I know he's probably not going to do great on this. That would be a place where I would look at that. And I don't need to pull out my rule book to know this, but I would just go, I would leverage your performance at the table at least in your advantage. And
Yes,
we've talked
okay.
about this
Yeah.
before in terms of utilizing the advantage disadvantage scale. That I think that there is no reason why someone who has a terrible intimidation, who just delivers a massively intimidating performance, still hasn't warranted a advantage on that roll. Even if, let's say, they're getting a -2 on each roll, advantage is a very, very potent,
very powerful
nudge towards success, as is disadvantage in the other direction. So,
Right.
so that's another consideration is again, as a DM, and we've talked so much on here about acknowledging when your players are interacting with the world in a way that, for the purposes of this discussion, is further immersing the rest of the table.
So yeah, reward it for sure.
Why not reward that?
Yeah.
And in many regards, what that means is I guess you'd say mechanically, or from a dice perspective, cutting them some slack. But that's also to say that, more often than not, people go for it, and it might be good. It might be,
Right.
I'm talking about utilizing that as a means of really helping to adjudicate when someone is allowing the immersion and the situation that they're finding themselves in to supersede the numbers on their character sheet.
Yeah, no, and I agree. A large part. I think when I think about it, what I'm starting to try to do a lot more with my character is going with my gut. Just like, I try not to overthink things, which I'll go into a little bit. But one thing I automatically think of the character who is like trying everything that doesn't make sense. So, just because it's like, I'm not gonna look at my character sheet. I'm just gonna start intimidating this barkeep for cheaper beer. Do things that make sense and things that your character.
Well, and I think that is antithetical to immersion. I mean, I think
Absolutely.
everyone else at the table is going to go like, "What are you doing, bud?" Like, but certainly, there's times where people at the table where an NPC is speaking to the party or to a character in the party, in a way that you can see the whole table going like, "Oh, are they going to stand for that shit? Like, is that going to, and maybe they've got nothing by way of intimidation, but if they come back hot, I mean, you can feel the ebb and flow of, that those interactions playing out. And I think everybody, can feel the same kind of discordance when someone is doing something for the sake of doing it that's totally off of their off of the cuff.
So I guess that's my one caveat to that. But yeah, when you think about it, if you're doing that, then you're not going for immersion. You're going for something else, which I don't know what your goal is when you're doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and now I will say I'm sure there's some great hijinks and
but that's
levity
your
that can be generated. But that might be an aspect of your character.
Yeah, that would have to be your aspect of your character.
In which case,
Hakeem Shashim.
I mean, Hakeem Shashim was
he was a coward.
Yeah,
so he'd run away and just do the most ridiculous shit. But that's who he was.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of a way in which remaining immersed with that character. A little context. This is just a character from One Shot. Who is actually a really enjoyable character. I'm really hoping that we're going to get to see more of Hakeem.
I'm really hoping to. So practice my George Takei voice again.
And that really was kind of a good example of a way that your immersion in your character may require that there are situations where you don't act heroically. You might be the hero of the story, but they're touching on the fears and weaknesses.
Right.
There might be Indiana Jones is never heroic around snakes.
No, which makes him so amazing. And so same thing with Han Solo. My favorite scene is when he's charging all the stormtroopers. He's charging a couple of them, and then all of a sudden he runs away as he's getting chased by like 5 times the numbers.
Yeah,
I mean that endears him so much to you.
Well, I think it makes him. There's some aspect of I was going to say there's some aspect of your fears and your weaknesses that make you relatable.
Yes.
And so now you touched on one thing with regard to, and I think it ties into, it certainly ties into pacing, but going with your gut.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you brought that back. Yeah. There's a phrase called analysis paralysis, and where you are so. I think a big part of this mindset can come from that you're trying to win D&D,
Right.
where you're like, what is the most optimal outcome so that I can win?
Yeah.
Whatever that is. And I think once you let go of that, it really frees you up to being much more organic.
I was going to say, I hadn't really given that a huge amount of thought, but I think if there are people out there who are holding that notion, even more so DMs.
Oh God! Please, DMs, don't try to win against us. You'll win every time.
I don't think there are many lasting DMs who are trying to win.
Oh God! Have you ever seen Crit Crab before on YouTube?
Yeah.
It's just full of that shit.
Yeah. I think so many horror stories come out of that
and
vibe.
Yeah.
But I really like that phrasing, and I think actually wanting to win. This is literally rolling off my head, so I may think about this after saying it and have to amend it. But wanting to win as a player might be one of the greatest barriers to immersion. Because everything about winning D&D is antithetical to being invested in all of the other aspects of what's transpiring at the table. I mean, there is no world in which being more immersed brings you closer to winning D&D. If anything, it actually might be the opposite. You should be more focused on what role is it that's going to give you the best chances of success every time you're rolling dice.
I've played that way, and you can totally play that way. But that's more of a dungeon crawl, Diablo type experience.
Well, and I certainly think it begins to immediately cut the creativity of the experience.
Yeah, you're not going to take risks if it's not optimal.
Right.
And that's one of the most beautiful things about D&D is when you take risks, you're across from the table from a human being who understands the risk and can soften the blow a little bit if you think it's pretty cool what you're doing,
or really ratchet it down and
falling rocks.
Drive it home.
You dare raise your fist against your DM? Die.
I'm running an actual player versus DM one shot at some point where
what chance you're literally God.
Well, I mean, I'll give you guys some benefit of the doubt in the scenario. But it'll just be like an egomaniacal.
It would be kind of fun, like a battle room kind of a thing where you're constantly just throwing enemies at us and seeing how long we can survive kind of thing. That'd be kind of a fun encounter.
A little wave survival.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I love a good zombie encounter. Those things are so much fun.
You know what? There may just be one of those.
Yeah, we are literally setting up the campaign for that. So
on the horizon.
Anyway, let's get back on subject.
Yeah, let's. I think we've started scaffolding out. We've got this foundation.
Yep.
We've got now that foundation is rewarding us with pacing, and that pacing is being further enforced or reinforced by, let's say, characters choosing to act in the moment rather than analyze every possible action. And that's a big deal, I think.
I think that might be but let's flip that to the DM side, because you need to prepare for pacing. Because I really think, a player can bog down pacing, but no one can kill pacing more than a DM.
Yeah, I mean, I do think pacing is thoroughly, I'll say thoroughly in the DM's domain. But as with almost everything that's thoroughly in the DM's domain, can be totally squirreled up by a couple players with an intent to do so.
And I will happily do it over and over again to infuriate you. No, not saying, but you can have the best players in the world, and if you have a DM who can't know how to pace a game, the best players in the world have no shot.
Right.
Versus the best DM in the world can probably
pace brand new players. Yeah, I do think that they probably have more at their disposal as far as controlling pacing.
Because you're God.
Glad you said it. It's
D&D.
And this is I'm gonna say this is a phrase. Maybe we even coined the term officially, but it's certainly one we've tapped on a number of times.
Yes,
it's one I've become increasingly enamored with, kind of thinking about, because it really is, and I think anyone who's run the game, or I should say who's run the game for a little while, this is not to say this happens every session. This is not to say this happens, but the more that you are running the game, the more you're finding yourself in this space. And I think this holds hands perfectly with immersion. It's the DM immersion, I think.
We're holding hands right now.
For those of you catching us via podcast.
Well, you said hold hands.
You missed a very homoerotic moment.
One of many.
Yeah. There. Don't worry. Another one's coming just around the bend.
You missed it.
No. But the DM flow state, and obviously we didn't coin the term flow state. I mean, that's a but
that's a heavy word too.
But the thing about and this definitely plays into pacing.
Yes.
And it's not a pacing that you can foist upon the world. The pacing, DM flow state is a place that I think you find yourself in which you, along with the rest of the table, are completely immersed in the world. But of equal importance, or certainly in my finding of this space, you have found yourself in an equilibrium where you have precisely the same amount of control over the story as the rest of because there's a lot of sessions where you maybe begin the session and kind of you've done your prep, you've done your but there are places where your players begin taking a narrative where and kind of this idea of, as a DM, making sure you have prepped. I mean, if you show up at a session and I have showed up to many a session where I've gone like, I guess I'm improving this one. Like, I mean, I might have an idea, like this is where we're at. I know what the rest of this dungeon looks like, or this keep, or, what have you. But, just life gets in the way sometimes, and sometimes you have to improv more than others. But I think when you've done an adequate amount of prep, and that's not necessarily session prep. That's more
world building kind of a thing, or
world building. I think so much of it is you've prepared in the context of improvisation. You have and this is again, this is not something you just prepare for at the beginning of a session.
You have to go into. You have to prepare for improvisation. It's like an oxymoron, right?
Well, in the sense that if you've been DMing for 10 years. Your improvisational preparedness presumably is higher than when you were DMing for your very first session.
Yeah, one would assume.
And it's I mean, you can't really, like you said, you can't really prepare for improvisation,
right?
But you can be more comfortable living in that space. But it is a requirement, because what's going to happen? It's almost like being in like a lucid dream kind of. Is you're in this flow state, you're in this space where. And again, it's a feedback loop. If your players are not immersed and you are just in it, you still won't get there. There's it is a communal experience. I think.
If you play for an audience and the audience is not like in it, it is a soul sucking experience that you never ever want to have happen.
I'm guessing you're talking from a musical standpoint.
Yeah,
I mean, and I can completely see.
It's horrible.
And that, so I actually think that's not a bad analogy. But it's this place where, because part of being in that state is relinquishing control. I mean, the players have to have taken the reins from you enough that now you're going, okay, what's going to happen next? And the second, as a DM, you're asking what's going to happen next. Now you are as akin to a player as you will ever be at the table. And so this is why I really think I say the DM flow state, not just the TTRPG flow state,
right? Because
I really think DMs have to work really hard to find themselves in the same level of anticipation and wanting for like what's around the next corner.
Right.
Then, players presumably are living in that space the majority of the time they're at the table.
We're being thrown situations and we react to it.
But what's beautiful about finding yourself in that space is definitionally it means that the players are invested, immersed, and now they are the ones who are kind of telling the story, and you are literally just you're there on your toes, and you're having to be as agile as you will ever be at the table.
So you're saying that, like, when you find yourself in these situations, that's not the time to be scared. That's the time to be like, oh, it's happening. It's happening, and to embrace it.
Yeah, and you you know when you're there. I mean, there's times where you're improving and you're not in that place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the vast majority of the time that that they go decide they're going to talk to the guy who's offloading grain from a ship
For at least 2 hours.
There's a pretty damn good chance that you were like, oh, well, that was just a random guy.
What's his
offloading
name?
grain.
What's his child's name? No,
What's
I want to speak to his child now. We've done that shit to you too.
Yeah, every now and then that comes up. But and here's another thing I'll say is, as a DM, I mean, I think there are pretty classic riffs on like the oh, hey, what's your name? You have any brothers or sisters? Oh, what are their names?
Right.
And as a DM, you're just going like, come on, like that's you're literally sparring with me right now.
Right.
But the beauty about sparring is you get better. You get a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. If you want to learn, yep.
And that flow state, and quite possibly as a DM, especially a new DM, perhaps you find yourself in that state of immersion. And it's not until you have garnered a level of comfort in that space that you enjoy being there. I mean, I absolutely think the reason people sit in the DM seat is because masochistically they like being in those situations.
Yeah.
But the more comfortable you get being there, pretty soon it becomes this you're chasing the dragon of
Right.
I can't wait until I'm sitting alongside them going like, oh shit, what's going to happen next?
Right. And also, as it sounds like you want to embrace being uncomfortable, which I will totally say happens when you first, like, because we've been trying to get more into this style of gameplay ever since we left 4E, and the beginning parts of this campaign, it was awkward, it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. That's a sign that you are going in the right direction.
Yeah, well, certainly
you
it
want
can
to
be.
be.
It certainly can
Yeah,
be.
no, I should very much stress. It's like, hey, if you're wanting that, if you're like, it's uncomfortable, I don't like it, I don't want to do this, then you absolutely shouldn't. But
yeah, as with anything, as you are improving at a skill, if you're skateboarding, you fall on your ass a hell of a lot, and it's not fun. But the more comfortable you get doing that, the more you enjoy being in that space and being able to do it. Let's pivot a little bit actually out of game, if you're cool with that, or kind of
100%.
Because I think there's so much that can be done to bolster immersion that actually has nothing to do with D&D or tabletop RPGs in general.
Actually, it's pretty much life, I think. To get in that flow state, especially from the player standpoint, especially when you're sitting there and you're not doing anything, you have temptations to check out. You have temptations to check on your phone. I think phones
phones are a killer. There's a lot of people.
Phones are amazing. They're fucking computers in our pockets. That I think I'll never get over the fact of what iPhones are. But they destroy the table because
I think it's never really been a problem at our table, which I'm hugely grateful for. But
we're not really big on that stuff.
But I also think that I've heard so many people. I've seen so many. I've seen actual plays where people are checking out on their phones, and I'm just going like, it's such a bad look. And I'll say, especially for as a DM. If you glance around your table,
break your heart.
That's a pretty demoralizing. I mean, it's the equivalent of being on that stage and seeing the audience like checking their watches for like when does the headliner come on? Because it's like so.
And that when I think of that, like, why are you checking your phone? And it's probably because you're bored. Well, why are you bored? Well, you probably are like, hey, it's not about me right now, so I'm going to check out. I think you're doing a disservice to yourself and to the rest of the table because all this shit's happening. The game is not you. It's the group. Yeah. And so just don't check out.
Yeah. I would also say boredom is absolutely symptomatic of poor pacing.
That's also true.
And
it's pretty much the DM's fault. That's exactly what it is.
Everything is. And especially, if your players die or TPK, it's like, it's never. I don't think a party. No. I don't think there's a party on the planet that has ever died because of decisions they made. It's always been because the DM poorly planned an encounter.
I don't know what to do. Everyone dies.
Yep, everyone does. No, and definitely that's a way that you can break immersion is kind of, and there, I think there's a laundry list of things you can be doing at the table that really are going to detract from other people's immersion as well as yours. But considering you generally run music for our table.
Yes. Not so much now that we're streaming because we have to be really careful with that stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, it's been as long as we've been playing. It's basically been in your domain.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is there have been an uncanny number of instances where either you were just really on your game or the stars just aligned, where things are transpiring at the table and the soundtrack lines up in such an unbelievable way. And that is the first endorsement of many endorsements. I would be blown away if there is a table out there that isn't listening to some music of some kind.
Yeah.
But when you talk about immersion, you want to talk about low overhead immersion. Get your tunes going.
So I'll here in a little bit. I'll look up who it is. He's a Spotify guy, and he's already created like mood blank, situation blank, atmosphere blank. So all you got to do is like, oh, this is. Hey, something serious is happening right now. Mood, atmosphere. And you just click shuffle. And you can pretty much find anything you need real quick.
Get me the name of it. I'll put the link in the description.
Actually, if I'm breaking my own rule.
Oh, my.
I'm so sorry.
Watch as the DM as I scan the table.
I know. While I do this.
You don't like my stories.
I don't. Get better, bitch.
While he's checking on that, no, I think oh, here we go.
Brian Davis is his name. If you search for him on Spotify,
check it out. Wait. Hold on. Boom. That's where Brian Davis is showing.
Brian Davis. He has like every playlist you could want. Again, we can't do that so much anymore because we're now
copyright.
So we have workarounds for that.
But absolutely, and this is something I would say is, maybe you guys are just tossing on some tunes in the background. God knows, for our 4E campaign, I mean,
we were playing
a whole lot of EDM and dubstep and all sorts of just wrecking monsters,
random shit. Oh yeah.
Loot and,
so yeah, whenever I think people think of music and D&D, they go like, "Oh, you're listening to Led Zeppelin and Metallica," and there's nothing wrong with that. But I highly recommend free music. Choose music that doesn't have words. Words really distract you from the situation. Go with instrumental tracks and do things that fit the situation. Don't do like. No, don't get me wrong. I enjoy a funny track every now and then, but like
I think every funny track on the Rakish Rovers playlist was
everyone else is a super serious, and all of a sudden you come like, I just gotta dance. That's me.
Right, that basically you have Josh to thanks for any of the any of the goofy tracks.
Hero in his own way.
The I would say a big takeaway is if there is not someone who is responsible, who has taken ownership of music,
and I highly suggest it not be the DM. They got enough going on.
Yes. I mean, if you're a DM and you love managing the music, by all means. But I love the fact that I'm not messing with it, and kind of talking about that same space of like sometimes just finding those moments that are just awesome, that that kind of flow state space, or even if it's just an awesome moment. I didn't plan that audio. That's one less thing that I'm controlling in the world. And to a greater or lesser extent with regard to immersion, a big part of what I'm going to have to say as a DM is find ways to relinquish control over the game space. And that's not always
that's got to be hard to do.
An appetizing thing for dungeon masters.
Yeah.
But it's there's just no other way to find it. I mean, you can be in an amazing situation and your entire party is totally engrossed and just, I mean, everything is awesome, but beat for beat how it's going to play out because you've planned this, you've done so much prep going into this. That will never be as meaningful to you, or in my experience anyways, as that same awesome situation that the characters spooled you into, and you're going like, okay, we're here now. Let's do that. And to some extent, it's almost this kind of desperate attempt to find the player experience within the scope of running the game. And I know that's maybe not the most that's maybe not the best way of saying that, because the first thing that came to mind was DMPCs and this kind of thing. It's getting to that place where the same lack of assuredness that a player has to carry at the table, that being able to find that as a DM is not always an easy thing to do, let alone you can find it all the time and whiff it because you're ill prepared, because you're but finding it and it still being something amazing and memorable is really kind of the boundary of that space, I think.
Would you say, I'm just trying to think, relinquishing control is a keystone in order to get immersion? I'm thinking that's almost a player character side. I'm trying to think if that might hold water.
Well, certainly from a DM standpoint, and actually I would even amend the phrasing, because relinquishing control implies that at any time you need my permission to take control of the situation. You don't. It's just there are times in which players really exercise, and this harkens back to one of our earlier episodes, really exercise their agency.
Yes.
They are commanding what's taking place at the table. And it may be a character, maybe the entire party, but when they are really in that space, and I don't think that you can find immersion as a player without accepting the encumbrance of the agency that your character must exude at the table. And so, but for a DM, absolutely, I think we'll just say I'll stay with relinquishing, but that seems to imply that you have a choice in the matter.
Well, you technically do.
Well, yes, but that's a bad look.
That's
it's a really bad look.
Yeah.
I would just say being comfortable with relinquishing control. It's more about finding enjoyment in that space than it is about actually relinquishing control. But I completely agree. I think to some extent it bleeds into the player side as well. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I was going to say from the player side, so many situations where just going off our own campaign, where Kat and Aster will be having a very serious conversation. Kel's in the room. He's hearing everything. But I'm making the conscious decision to not interfere. That would take away from what's happening. I think that's one of the greatest questions you can always ask yourself as a player, and it's something I need to bring up more and more, is what I'm doing going to be adding to the positive experience at the table, or is what I'm going to be doing distracting from the, So it is very difficult because there are many times where Kel could say something right now, but I can see, Amanda and Ariel are in it. And if I were to suddenly jump in there, all of a sudden I shatter it.
Yeah. And that is as sound advice for any DM as could be ever be floated out there. There are many, many times where you just need to let your party have the exchange. You don't need to introduce a guard to break up the conversation. You don't need to introduce, you don't need that knock on the door that breaks things up. Sometimes you do. But
that's where the wisdom and experience comes in.
Yeah, I think, again, that impulse to go, I need to drive this forward, I need to do something.
Right.
That's a response to the players are taking control of the scene. They are beginning to go, we're having this exchange, we're doing this, and as a DM, you're going, I should be doing something. I should be, that is not, I think that's an impulse that sometimes you need to feed. But I think as you get more comfortable with your players grasping the scene and making it whatever it is they want to make it, you go, I don't need to do anything. I'm on autopilot, right? I mean, it's one of the best places you can be, is to be able to sit back in your chair and watch something play out.
Right.
It's relaxing. It's hugely rewarding because, I mean, no doubt.
You set the play, basically. Now you're watching the actors go.
They're playing out a scene based on circumstances that have been presented to them by you. And I think especially new DMs, especially when people are starting out running the game, they really feel like they're not doing their job, if they're not injecting brand new, exciting stuff right around every, sometimes the most exciting thing that's going to happen in an entire session is that interaction, that a
Right.
very important personal interaction, and allowing that the space. Again, what's cool is the physicality of immersion. Is there's been times, so many times, in fact, and at our table, I've seen it on other actual plays where you have two characters interacting with each other at a table, and you can see the whole table start.
Oh, I know, right?
The whole table begins leaning in, and you can feel, much like a cinematographer, that scene is pushed. It's getting to be a more close up.
I know what you're talking
Everybody
about.
is being drawn into that scene, and that's a great cue as a DM to go, this is not the time to introduce a fart joke. Like maybe there's a go-to NPC who's been fart joking their way through the entire session.
Okay,
that's not the time.
Right.
And it might be right after that. There's a great time where the scene ends and they hear a knock on the door.
Right.
And it's
And that's just
old
reading the room.
stanky pants.
Right. And which would be actually a really good thing. Like if you have a really, really serious, hardcore thing where people are really emotional, you got to break the mood a little bit. It could make sense, but that's just reading a room. That's having social skills. That's having...
Yeah. And I think so much of that, and so much of, I think, what we talk about here really does come down to, hopefully these conversations are getting people, both players and DMs, thinking about things that maybe you wouldn't come to on your own if you hadn't been running the game or playing the game
for like 10 years.
For some substantial period of time. Some people, it'll be session 2 and they're off to the races.
It just depends on your table.
But it really is, it's a deal where I think so much of that plays into the immersion aspect, is allowing, and this does harken back to pacing, allowing that pacing to lull when it's important to just have that moment, that quiet moment.
But you also need to be able to ramp it up when it needs to ramp up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it's and I know we were talked about pacing as being, kind of in the DM wheelhouse, but to the kind of to the DM flow state point, I am elated when a player does something that elevates the pace, like ratchets the pacing up. A good example was, a great example of things playing out. This is when you guys were in Old Peltark and the Gith arrive. And that whole scenario,
holy fuck,
just switched.
That was an intense, like,
yeah, it was.
We went,
but the crazy part is my prep involved. Okay, this is the remainder of this.
Yeah.
Of the Old Peltark Vault. I could not have anticipated that Aster was going to use her ability that would ping the Gith, and so that they would be able to locate her. So kind of in real time, that was a decision she made that yanked the narrative out of my control.
Oh, that was so intense.
And then at that point, as they came in, and it made for a far more interesting conclusion to that space than it would have been if you guys had taken a long rest and gone in and dealt with the Pit Lord in whatever manner you would have dealt with.
Right. No, it was oh fuck. How are we going to? So we just killed a Hydra, and then we actually fucking wrecked that Hydra. We were doing pretty good. We're like, hey, we were riding high. We're like, oh yeah, we fucking killed the Hydra. All of a sudden, Gith drop out of a floating ship and are after Aster. Like, well, fuck, we've used a lot of our abilities. The reason why we're so fresh is we used a lot of our abilities. So like, okay, what do we do? So we ran back to a Pit Lord that was bound to a room and used the Pit Lord to attack the Gith. It was
and it's staged for a far more interesting engagement than it would have been.
Insane.
If
it was insane.
If, let's say, she hadn't used that ability and maybe you faced the Gith after you finished Old Peltark.
Right.
Maybe you faced the Pit
all
Lord
fresh and all
before,
that.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's a good example of the way in which her deciding to use that ability ratcheted the pace up.
Oh yeah.
Like there's just no, I no longer had a say in whether this was going to go to the next level or not.
This brings me to we're talking about flow state, and one of the things with flow state, if you want to get in the flow state, is you want challenge to be challenging, but not impossible. But you don't want things to be easy.
You're
need
talking
that,
about kind of the traditional coining of the
right?
flow
So
state. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
think about that with pacing. It sounds like you're kind of doing that. You have your easy encounters, but you need to ratchet it up every once in a while. It's like it's overarching. It's not like ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. I think over let's say a given session, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, if you're going to find yourself in that place as a player or as a DM, there are really, really difficult combat encounters, say. You guys, Old Peltark Old Peltark's going to get a lot of pinging here because that was a
fun
monster.
as shit. I'm excited to see. Well, we're about to do another dungeon crawl, so we'll see what happens here. Tune in to Rakish Rovers.
Ooh,
Plug.
Little plug there.
Shameless.
That's June 1st for those of you who haven't checked out.
Oh, don't know when this is going to be released, though, but probably before June.
Yeah,
1st.
it should be before.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, I really do think that the ease or difficult, like we've played some in Old Peltark. There were 2 separate combat encounters in which one player had single-digit health, and that was
it's so much.
I mean, it was that
fun.
close to a TPK.
That's the shit I live for. I love that shit.
But something I'll say is because those were pretty. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about the pacing of those encounters, but the challenge of those encounters was high enough that like we kind of passed through and popped that bubble of now you can see where the players are going like, oh shit, okay, and you can see people starting to go, I need to take this more seriously, and that is not to say that you can't have a very tense level of immersion.
Yeah,
certainly if you're running a combat and your players are going like, oh no, what's going?
They're
like,
immersed.
They're engaged with that combat. But I absolutely think to your point of scaling difficulty, you can push difficulty to a point where morale begins to
100 and 100%.
A really interesting one. The psychosis, Aster's psychosis Dracolich fight. I 100% saw that exact scenario play out in which the players were realizing because by definition it was too difficult an encounter.
Yes, yeah,
players
overhead.
were realizing this well before they were dead.
Yep,
and you could see them going like, their minds are starting to slip to their next character sheet.
Yep,
they're not thinking about what's happening here,
which is not a bad thing.
No, it's not. But it's just one of these deals where if you push that difficulty too far, their minds start going to.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Well, it starts going to mechanically. This is too difficult.
Right.
Not. It's rare that you see players who feel that they are outmatched by difficulty harness that as immersive fuel.
Yeah.
You know, it's rare that you see them go, I know I'm gonna die here, and it seems pretty unfair, but I'm gonna go out in like true.
That's my if
fashion.
I could go back, and I don't know if I was doing that, and if I was, I would go back. That was during the cabin trip where it was like is intense D&D.
Yeah.
But if you're finding yourself in that situation, either one, run away, because I mean that's what your character would do. If you're fighting a dude who looks like the Mountain hand to hand, you're probably not gonna fight that dude.
Yeah.
But also, hey, if you're gonna die, don't start immediately checking out. Embrace, I'm about to die.
Yeah.
That's a huge moment.
I would absolutely say from an immersion standpoint, that's a difficult thing to ask of a player when they're staring down their own mortality.
If your goal is not to win D&D, though, I think that's a very...
Certainly, I think that barrier, it helps.
Yes. But I agree, that is is very anti-traditional games.
Yeah. But I do think, much in the same way that you're probably feeling like, this is my character, I made this character, I've been with this character for however long. What do you owe that character in their death?
That's a good
point.
know?
Because if your rationale for being in the place where you're going like, I can't believe that we're all going to die right here. Right. Well, presumably that's because you care about this character. How would you want that story to end?
I have sent Kel to his death many times. There's many times I've made an action. I was like, Kel's probably going to die right now.
There's a couple I can think of specifically.
I was like, okay.
And a couple where it's like, it's pretty nuts that he didn't. Like specifically the Devourer, that one, when you were in Gallus's chamber, the big.
Oh, Yeah.
That one I thought was gonna be it, but
Yeah. No, I survived. Kel's a fighter.
he's a survivor. That's all right.
Yeah.
But I guess getting back to we've kind of touched on music. I certainly think food and drink.
Can be, but can also be distracting.
Oh, absolutely. But I'll say nothing is going to dismantle people's immersion as a bunch of growling stomachs. Like, you know, I mean, and most people, you know, whatever, they order their pizzas, they do their whole, they've got
we
their,
should
they've
do an
got their,
episode on like our favorite grub,
their
top
routine.
10 favorite grub. Do top 10 lists do well. We should do that.
Yeah, top. We're going to hit the sellout train at some point in which we have
I'm there, baby.
I'm there.
Oh,
I was there when we started. No, I do. I actually, I agree. And there's a lot of actually good top 10s to talk about in the tabletop and D&D sphere.
But as far as going off that, yeah, I 100% agree. If you are hungry, that's a distraction. That's like a basic human need.
Yeah. So just a quick point for DMs. I mean, presumably you're the one hosting the games. Not always. Sometimes some DMs are traveling. If you feel like your players are distracted regularly, like figure out how everyone can eat before you start your game. I mean, just make sure
bring it up.
People are comfortable.
If you're playing with people, there's usually one person like, yeah, I can bring over a couple of frozen pizzas. Or if you have that bomb ass person, yeah, I'll bring over my slow cooker, and we can have a proper thing. You know,
shoulder. I need some cold shoulder in my life.
I know, right?
But no, I mean, so food and drink. I think the food one is more of a don't let it be a dismantling factor.
Right.
The drink is a little bit of a different animal.
We've had problems with that before.
Most people, I think, I guess, who would be listening to this, most people who are playing D&D are of the alcohol consumption range.
Maybe.
Well, I think pretty definitely most. But
really? Oh, I have no idea about the demographics.
Well,
so I'm curious.
I mean, that's not to say that there isn't some substantial subset of people who aren't.
Right.
Likely they may still be. But whatever their
Okay, well, let's just go with the assumption that we're talking. Hey, don't drink alcohol until you're over 21 years old, and definitely don't drink and drive.
What if they don't live in the continental United States?
If you're in Britain, hell yeah, do your thing.
Okay, whatever your legal drinking age is,
Europe or wherever the fuck you are.
Yeah, but ultimately, I think it really is a deal where absolutely, in terms of immersion, I mean, there's a reason. There are all manner of things that you consume, alcohol being one of them, that might aid or inhibit this.
Yeah, so that I am a person. If you get a couple drinks in me, I loosen up a lot. There's a reason why I'm drinking beer during these things.
You've been drinking beer this whole time?
Yeah, surprise, motherfuckers. This ain't water. It's close, but it ain't. I'm trying to watch my figure. Gotta drink the light beers. But that being said, there's a part of me that's like, but you're using a drug to get a desired effect. But I don't see a problem with it. But there is a point.
Yes, there's absolutely a line in which
I've crossed many a time.
I would also say that it's a more catastrophic crossing if you're the DM.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, it's and I think that, but it's at least worth noting. If we're talking about immersion, we're talking about music. We haven't touched on kind of music's part of ambiance.
Yeah,
but, don't be afraid to kick those lights down. Or a couple of beers or wine or whiskey or whatever it is whatever gets everyone feeling like they're badass adventurers who are going to go.
Yeah, when you're in a tavern and drinking a beer, drink an actual beer if you're of age.
Do it. Regardless.
All the cool kids are doing it. Are you cool? Peer pressure. It works.
This is officially... Are
we gonna get
screens?
This is what's gonna get us demonetized.
I don't even know if we're monetizable.
Probably not. We say fucked way too many times.
Yeah, probably.
Fuck.
Well, this episode's gone now. No, but I think that really is kind of. There's so much that you can do, not inside your game. There's plenty you can do inside your game,
outside your game,
and there's so much about all of the episodes that we talk about that really harken to. These are the things that you can do at your table to aid with that process of finding that flow state, finding that immersion at the table. Something that, very few episodes are going to give us the opportunity to talk about is what can you do outside of that space.
Yeah.
So I definitely think, I know for me, I drink like a fish. So
and if you do drink like a fish, also drink water. Drink one beer, drink one water. Because
vitamin B.
And vitamin B. Oddly, as you get older.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Hey, oh, dude. Yeah, pharmaceutical companies. Back us up.
No, but so I really think that, to harken back to our little scaffolded out pyramid.
Okay,
So we've got our foundation.
Right. That's knowing your rules, knowing your character, knowing.
It's just know your role and shut your mouth.
Right.
Maybe don't shut your mouth.
No, don't shut your mouth, especially if you're the DM.
In fact, actually open your mouth a lot. There's a bunch of talking that we have to do, but it's Tuesday.
There it is.
But so we've got our foundation. Boom.
Okay. All right, next layer.
Scaffolded on top of that. Well, I should say just magically scaffolded up from having a solid foundation is solid pacing. Your pacing is playing out. Bing. You're moving through the world space of your game in a more efficient manner because everyone's prepared. And kind of then scaffolded up on top of that.
I don't know if we've used the word flow state. I think that's above that. Trying to get into that flow state.
Well, I think that's kind of the
Pinnacle?
that's the Illuminati eye at the top of the pyramid. I think for the DM, like I said, I do think it's a different animal than it is for.
Because I think if you're I think for us we can probably get there around there. What would you say is your next step?
Well, I just think once you're at a place where, let's say, lights are up, everyone is completely sober, people maybe even a little bit hungry, the room is silent other than what you're talking about. Now's the time to go. We've got the foundation buttoned down for the game.
I see what you're
What
saying.
can we start doing outside of the game to really push that ambiance? If you have, there is a game, and I think is a perfect example of ambiance, called 10 Candles, and I think it's one of the coolest mechanics that a tabletop RPG.
Oh, it's a tabletop. Okay.
Has ever implemented.
Okay.
And you turn all of the lights off, and there are 10 candles burning in the center of the table. A circle of 10 candles.
Like
And it is a we'll call it kind of a even Lovecraftian almost, but a horror environment. I know you're not big on the horror. But just hear me out from a it's every system's what you make of it.
Yeah, right. Sweet, it's an orgy game.
But no, I think this really hits on the head of how much atmosphere plays into your immersion. The idea is you have these 10 candles, and failure in the campaign is marked by blowing one of those candles out.
Sick. That's a great idea.
And when the last candle's blown out, everyone dies.
That could be. You could use that in an encounter too.
I have thought so many times about how I want to tie. But imagine, like, you have the most visual representation of the morale, and everyone starts the game knowing that they're going to die. The end of the campaign ends. It's literally
you are going to die.
Yeah, it's the telling of the story of
the
last days of these people's lives. That's the whole game. Is
that's interesting.
Is them surviving in this.
That's interesting.
But every time, so failure, instead of it being like, a certain amount of hit points are marked down, certain amount of a failure occurs. The group is trying to accomplish things. Something fails, a candle goes out, and the room gets darker and darker and darker. And when the last candle goes out, that is it. And it's a perfect exemplification of how much immersion, what a simple mechanic that is.
That's brilliant.
It's an unbelievable mechanic.
That's
it's
awesome.
a really,
Whoever
really
came up with that is a
cool concept. It's
But okay, so I see what you're saying. Flow state is the ultimate. And I see what you're saying. Like, if you're a player and you're hungry, if you have distractions, if you're looking at your phone, you cannot enter flow state.
No doubt. And I think as a DM, for the most part, we definitionally are more shackled to the engagement of the game because someone's constantly asking something
versus
of
us. We can check out for, sometimes it's 30 minutes to make it longer.
Yeah. I mean, there's times where something's playing out. The party is split. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I would say aside from the classic never split the party, there's a rationale to that, but purely from an engagement standpoint, a DM can only do so much to bounce between those two. You know, there's something to be said for an argument for staying engaged in the narrative,
Right, which really helps during those, because we have had that happen quite a bit actually in this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have opted to do your own things.
Yep.
Luckily, in a lot of cases, we can jump pretty
quick.
but it's not like opposite ends of the continent, which would be a big, a big deal.
Yeah.
But and then, like I said, I really think the pinnacle of that pyramid, and it's something certainly as a DM, I can't speak for the player side, but it really is when you start putting all of those pieces together. There are occasions where you find a glimpse where, and again, I can't explain it from a player standpoint, because as a DM, it's something I think akin to sitting alongside your players and discovering the story with them.
I think from the player standpoint, it's just where you are lost. You are no longer caring. You're just kind of the same that you're observing, or you're I guess sometimes you're an actor in it, but it's you're not really concerned with a lot of other things. You're not concerned what time it is. You're not concerned about anything else. You're just totally plugged in.
I think that that is the space that so many tables are aspiring to be.
Yes, and it's not like we're there all the time, for goodness sake.
No, I legitimately think it is such a potent experience at the table. It's what draws you back.
Right. It's that sweet drug, that the blue crystal.
Oh, okay. It's
we're comparing it to meth.
It's meth.
What's the new fentanyl? Is that the new drug?
Yeah, fentanyl. That's the one that's killing everybody.
Yay!
Yep.
Go pharmaceuticals.
So let's end this one on a high note. Fentanyl. Today's episode is brought to you by fentanyl.
I heard it's cheap. Anyway, but if I could, thinking about everything we've talked about, if I could give players one piece of advice to help, I think in order to break, because whenever we think game, we think we have to win. And so maybe changing your mind, not maybe changing how you win D&D, but don't become obsessed with winning D&D. Maybe winning D&D is trying to get to that flow state instead of
that. I think is one. It is a equally noble aspiration and a harder to attain, because winning D&D, I think, is actually pretty easy and boring as hell.
That's an interesting thought.
I mean, or at least the things you could do that would make you win D&D are pretty prescribed. You look at your character sheet, you go, right, these are the 8 things
these that are the things I do well, and
I will never do anything else.
Yeah, that is boring as hell. Yeah. And I've done it, and it don't get me wrong, I still do it, but there are times when you need to depart from that.
Absolutely. And I think so. I think that's a pretty solid endorsement for looking toward that flow state. I like that you brought the game notion up, because the very first episode, Why We D&D, we touched on the notion of I don't remember who brought it up, but dispensing with the idea of a game, because it's simply bigger than that.
Yeah,
it's not that anymore. I mean, there really isn't another game that you can think of. And I
guess it is a game, but it's not your traditional sense of a game.
No. And to a great point to that, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, we're probably over.
A great point to that is there are so many people who I have described the modern myth Endeavor to, and they cannot fathom why you would ever stream a game. Like, why would anyone ever want to watch someone play Dungeons and Dragons? And there's millions and millions and millions of reasons floating around out there.
Yes,
Critical Role.
Yeah, way to go, professional voice actors who are classically trained. You dicks.
No, but it's a deal where, like, if you're thinking about it purely as a game, I agree, it makes no sense. How could you possibly watch people crunch numbers on dice at a table but it's not that. It's so much more than that.
Yeah, if you're watching that means you haven't gotten the first pillar so well. You haven't gotten the base. If you're there crunching numbers for like a while, yeah, that's going to totally kill immersion. You haven't gotten your base yet.
Right. And I think as you move toward that more immersive state, you certainly are moving towards a place that is, let's say, more digestible via an audience.
Which again, Critical Role, I think, example. Man, watching Matt Mercer run a encounter sometimes, it's like, it's watching art. It's amazing.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I don't think that's hyperbole.
Yeah.
That's it legitimately is. I mean, it's no different than watching someone do a live painting or play music or play. I mean, it's its own thing.
Yeah.
To mirror your point, DM side, don't shy away from those moments where your players are doing exactly what they should be doing, which is grabbing the reins out of your hands and going, "Thanks, bud. I got it from here." I'm going. That stump that you described, that hollowed out tree stump, I'm gonna crawl down that thing. I got to see what's down there. And you go like, really? Like, you don't want to go into the rune covered cave entrance? That
No, you're not gonna go.
Nope. I'm going back to that stump. The beauty is they have just asked you to join them in flow state.
Yeah,
now, you can say no, or you can hand them the reins and hop on for the ride. Yeah. And that is the biggest thing I would say is get comfortable with your own existence in that space. Get comfortable with allowing the players, or I should say, with joining the players in spaces where they have taken a narrative in a totally different direction, and you will be rewarded hand over fist. It's the best. It literally is the best place to be a DM. I don't think there's any comparison. Yeah. That's, I think, the DM side. I think you banged out the player side. Right. This has been Immersion right here at Split Screen D&D.
Yeah. And do you have something?
No, I don't. Other than if you would immerse yourself down in the comments zone and drop. And this goes for really, all of you out there, whether you're catching us via podcast, whether you're catching us via YouTube. If you want to support the channel, certainly we really appreciate you guys checking us out on the podcast. We're seeing, we just saw actually a big spike over this last weekend. So thank you guys so much. For those of you over on the YouTube side, it helps us out a tremendous amount to drop those comments, hit that like. You got to subscribe and hit that little bell to catch those notifications.
Absolutely.
So you never miss an episode. I don't even know if I mentioned that these are the episodes where we attack all things D&D from both sides of the screen. So anyways,
I forgot to do that.
That's usually a thing, but maybe it wasn't this time. Whatever the case is, thank you guys so much for joining us right here on Split Screen D&D.
All right, so situation.
Oh.
All right, you're a night hag. And you are.
Do you see my night hag hand?
Yeah, that's a nice little creepy little night hag.
I wish I had like a thing that I could.
Fucking cool enemies, by the way. Night hag, and you are. You have captured a little. No, let's go with a teenage girl, and you're scaring her and doing all the thing night hags do, and you're. That's the thing, and you have to end with the world is yours.
Am I? Can I be completely nude? Is that fine?
I think that's usually how it works.
Is that a prerequisite of being a night
if you want to get in character, you go right ahead. Immerse yourself.
All right, I got my night hag hand out.
You know, Missy, that your friends aren't coming for you. No one's coming for you. And if they do,
he glances back to the cauldron that is already boiling. You can see some sweat beading on the young girl's face.
They'll make a tasty meal. But for all of you, the world is yours.